Bom dia.
Bom dia.
Bom, obrigada a todos aqui presentes e também o pessoal que está assistindo ali pela transmissão. A ilustre Theresa May é membro do Parlamento Britânico desde 1997 e foi primeira-ministra do Reino Unido de 2016 a 2019. Seu governo foi marcado por ações na área de saúde, ações de combate a mudanças climáticas, mas principalmente por 3 tentativas de um acordo para a saída do Reino Unido da União Europeia, do Brexit. Ela voltou ao parlamento agora, depois que saiu de Downing Street, e tem pela frente aí o desafio de participar da escolha do novo primeiro-ministro no lugar de Boris Johnson. Para vocês que estão aí aqui na Expo 2022, no auditório, nós temos a tradução simultânea, se vocês quiserem ouvir. Vamos passar a inglês agora. Ela entrou? Hi.
Hello.
Ms. May, it's a great pleasure to have you here with us today. And I would like to thank you for helping us to understand this complex scenario that we are facing today in the world. But prior to talk about politics and economic issues, allow me to ask you a more personal question. You served as the 2nd female Prime Minister in the UK after Margaret Thatcher, and you had to deal with an enormous amount of pressure. What is your message to young women and to women leaders on how to deal with pressure? And if I may add one more question, do you believe it would have been any different if you were a man?
Well, thank you very much for those questions. And first of all, I'm very sorry that I'm not able to be physically present with you in Brazil. I would have enjoyed being able to visit Brazil, but I'm very pleased to be able to hold this conversation across the airwaves, so to speak. You're right, I mean, being Prime Minister does involve significant pressures. I also worry that I think young people today find themselves subject to more pressures than perhaps was the case when I was a young person. But what I always found when I was Prime Minister, when I was dealing with pressure, was that it's very important to believe that you're doing the right thing. If you have confidence in what you are doing, if you're doing what you believe in, I think that helps you to deal with the pressures. And also to always remember what your goal is, and to always think of that whatever we choose to do in life, whatever our aims are, we always come across barriers. There's always pressure on us to move in a particular direction or another, or there are difficulties that seem to be stopping us from achieving what we want to achieve. The important thing is to persevere and always keep that end aim and that end goal in sight. And I think if you do that, then it makes it easier to withstand the pressures that come and that you are subject to. As regards the question as to whether or not it would have been any easier if I was a man, I think everybody is subject to different pressures when they're Prime Minister, depending on the circumstances and the issues that they have to deal with. But there are some things that women leaders, political leaders, have to deal with that the men don't. Notably, a great attention to what one wears. Whereas a man can put certainly in the UK, a Prime Minister can put a suit on, a shirt and a tie, and nobody really thinks very much about it and comments on it. As Prime Minister, a woman is constantly being subject to that extra pressure of thinking about what you have to wear, what people are going to take from what messages they take from what you're wearing on any particular day. So there are some added pressures when you're a woman.
Still on that subject, Mrs. May, you served as a prime minister for about 3 years, right? Boris Johnson just left after 3 years in service as well as a prime minister. And when we compare with other famous professions in the UK for leaders, right, like let's say a football coach, they tend to stay for a lot longer, right? They tend to stay for 5, 7, 10 years. So my question to you would be, do you think that being a prime minister in the UK is the hardest job in the world, or one of the hardest jobs in the world? And if so, why is it so hard to please the British people, right, when you are a prime minister?
Well, I have to say there are some football coaches in the UK who have not lasted very long. And actually, when you look across our history, it's varied. So in the 1960s and 70s, there were a lot of changes of government and changes of prime minister. Then when Margaret Thatcher came in 1979, she was actually in office for, 11 years. Then, of course, John Major was in for a number of years, Tony Blair for quite a period of time. And then, as you say, more recently, for myself and Boris, just over the 3 years each. And I think it's largely about the circumstances and the issues that you're having to deal with. But being a world leader, being leader of any country, is a highly pressured, very difficult job. You're balancing a whole set of different issues, a whole set of different concerns. And of course, when I heard in the introduction that word, as we say, the B word in the UK, Brexit, was mentioned, that was very much what I was dealing with. And of course, my time as leader came to an end, time as Prime Minister came to an end when I wasn't able to get my Brexit deal through the House of Commons. So there was a specific issue that led to me leaving after a short period of time. So I think it has varied. The tenure in office, the time in office of British Prime Ministers has varied over the years. But it is not an easy job. And I think in today's world, where people get a lot of information, some of it obviously false information on social media, you're dealing with a much faster paced, moving world, constantly responding to issues, rather than perhaps, say, half a century ago, certainly, when life wasn't quite so fast-paced, and when perhaps people's demands weren't so specific or so great.
Ms. May, let's talk a little bit about international affairs. When you were in Downing Street, you criticized Russia for its unacceptable behavior and urged the country to stop its irresponsible and destabilizing activity. Now we are in the middle of a war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. How do you think Europe and the UK should deal with Russia going forward, and what's the role of NATO in the region?
Well, thank you. Yes, I mean, I made those comments about Russia. Of course, when I was Prime Minister, we had a particular experience of the Russian state in the UK when the Russian state attempted to kill two individuals living in the UK, one of them a former Russian intelligence officer, by the use of a chemical weapon on the streets of a city in our country, Salisbury. The attempt to kill the Skripals, particularly Sergei Skripal, by the use of Novichok. So we had a very particular incidence in the UK of the Russian state acting within our own borders. But of course, we were also seeing Russia taking action elsewhere. So we'd already seen Russia invade Crimea in 2014. We'd see them move into parts of Georgia in 2008. And we saw them active, of course, in supporting the Syrian regime too. So there were a number of issues around Russia's behaviour which led me to make those comments about their behaviour being unacceptable. I think in relation to their further invasion of Ukraine, I think Europe, the UK, and alongside the United States have reacted in the right way. We continue to give support to Ukraine, Ukrainian people. We have many Ukrainian refugees here in the UK, as other countries have, particularly Poland has taken a significant number of Ukrainian refugees. We are continuing to provide support to Ukraine in its fight against Russia. And I think that the other element of action that's been taken, which has been important, is the very heavy sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, which will have an increasing impact over time. Now, NATO continues to be the bedrock of the defence of Europe. It is significant that we now have Finland and Sweden, who previously had not wanted to be members of NATO, actively wanting to join NATO. And if we look at what President Putin's action in Ukraine has resulted in, it's resulted in the opposite of what he wanted. He wanted to divide Europe and the United States. We have come together, close together around this issue. He wanted to damage NATO. NATO will be stronger in future. He wanted fewer NATO troops on the Russian border, and the numbers have been increased in countries where there's been a presence in the past, that we've increased that presence. So Putin has achieved the opposite in relation to NATO that he wanted to achieve. But NATO continues to be absolutely the bedrock of the defence of Europe, and we continue to be a key player within NATO.
Still on the geopolitics topic, which is very important, obviously, nowadays, do you believe we are seeing a reshape of some of the, let's say, tectonic plates here in the global order, in the sense that now we see Russia, China and India maybe getting a little bit closer than they used to be in the past, and that's you know, on the one side you have those countries getting together, on the other side you have NATO and the Western countries. If there is any merit to this view, what can we expect in the future of this, from this new geopolitics shifts that we're seeing in the world?
Well, it's certainly the case, I think, that if we look at Russia, Russia is opportunist. President Putin has been opportunist. I think he saw actually a less cohesive West. This was reflected in a major security conference in 2019, the Munich Security Conference, which issued a report called Westlessness, which commented on the perception that countries of the West had been less cohesive, less willing to defend their values, less willing to take the action necessary to defend their values. And I think President Putin saw that and saw that as an opportunity. What, of course, has happened, as I mentioned in response to the previous question, is that the West has come together much more strongly in response to Russia's actions. But if we widen that out, as your question has asked, across the globe, we certainly do see, of course, China, which has always disliked the economic preeminence of the United States of America and the global presence of the United States, acting in ways to try and change that balance, to change that world order. And we also see Russia, in terms of its invasion of Ukraine, further invasion of Ukraine, also trying to reassert itself on the world stage as a major power. So I think there are some different dynamics, geopolitical dynamics, taking place today. And you mentioned India, you know, a huge democracy, an economy that has been developing rapidly over the years, positioned geographically between Russia and China, and actually balancing, I think, its interests in relation to Russia and China. So yes, it has those links with Russia, it has concerns about China, but trying to find a way between, if you like, those two large countries and those two significant countries. Now, what do we do about this? If we look at what an ideal situation might be, of course, being able to continue to hold fast to those types of institutions that have helped to keep peace generally across the world since the Second World War, the multilateral institutions, the World Trade Organization and others. What would be ideal would be for all of these countries like China to be able to be part of that and to feel that they can actually join with the sort of rules and the sort of ways in which we conduct our business and conduct our economies and our standards. The difficulty, of course, is that there is a very real difference in the political approach that is taken in China from the democracies of the West. And we see little sign at the moment of that situation changing. So I think there is a genuine effort by China, particularly, to change the balance of power across the world. I think in the West we have to be aware of that, aware of the actions China has been taking, for example, in many countries in Africa and elsewhere with their Belt and Road initiative. And the West should be doing more to support some of those economies which China has been reaching out to.
Thank you. Regarding global issues, the pandemic and now the war in Ukraine severely impacted the global supply chain and manufacturing. And we can see the consequences on inflation, for example. Do you believe is this the end of globalization as we think, as it is? Or do you think we will see a rebirth of multilateral agreements at any point?
Well, as you say, first the pandemic and then Russia's further invasion of Ukraine have had an impact on supply chains. And the world that we knew, where companies didn't have to hold huge stocks of items because they could easily get them on a just-in-time basis, accrue their supply chains very easily. That world has changed, and certainly there are more companies here in the UK looking at seeing what manufacturing they can bring home or bring closer to home. I don't think this is going to lead to an absolute end to globalization, though, and nor should it. It should not do so, because we know that free trade around the world is a power for good. It is trade that helps to develop economies, that has helped to see advances across the world, people being moved out of poverty, people's health situations improving. So that impetus to economies across the world is important. If we all simply withdraw within our own borders, then that will not be good for the world as a whole, and certainly won't be good for those who are among the most vulnerable across the world. And neither would it be good for individual countries in the medium to long term either. So I very much hope that we will be able to move back to a situation where people see the genuine benefit of the multilateral institutions and of multilateral arrangements. But we will certainly be going through a period where companies will be asking themselves about issues in their supply chain and about issues to make sure that they have a greater confidence in supply chains, which will, I think, in some cases mean bringing manufacturing closer to where those companies need it to be. But this, I don't think, will see, as I say, an end to globalization. And as I say, globalization, I believe, has been an overall good for economies and for societies across the world.
Now let's talk about energy, right, and energy policy, which has definitely become one of the most crucial topics in the world today, and especially in Europe, right? I mean, in recent years, we've seen a lot of public pressure and also policies going against fossil fuels. But at the same time, Europe is still very dependent on natural gas, and especially natural gas coming from Russia, right, which we talked a lot about today. So I'd like to ask you, Mrs. May, in the long run, what do you think are the solutions for Europe and in its energy security policy? Do you think we'll see a rise in nuclear power again? And perhaps in the meantime, maybe coal as well as a near-term solution, which I know from an environment perspective is not ideal, but maybe considering what's happening right with the risks on natural gas coming from Russia, how do you see this medium-term and also long-term in terms of energy policies in Europe?
Well, you're right that energy policy and energy security are key issues for Europe at the moment. Obviously, that has been exacerbated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and issues around Russian oil and gas. But actually, the energy position was getting difficult in terms of costs and prices before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It is certainly from people living here in the UK, the cost of their energy, heating their homes, having fuel to be able to cook, for example. These things, the energy is becoming more and more expensive, is predicted to become even more costly, and is causing real difficulties for many people here in the UK. So this is an issue that we need to take extremely seriously. But it's against the background of another bigger issue that we need to take seriously, which is climate change and dealing with climate change. And I think the question we have to ask in relation to energy security across Europe is what more can we be doing which advances our cause for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, while at the same time increasing our energy security and providing lower cost energy for individuals, for people. And I think this is an equation that can be solved. I was the Prime Minister who brought in the legislation in the United Kingdom for us to have the target of net zero emissions by 2050. It's a tough target, but it can be achieved. And we do need to, I think, now be looking at an economy that is much more based on green energy and on the green skills that we need to support that particular energy sector. So I think that what countries across Europe need to be doing is to be saying, as I say, what can we do that is going to enhance our ability to meet our greenhouse gas emission targets, which at the same time will increase our energy security. Now, you mentioned the particular issue of nuclear. I've always believed that nuclear should be a part of our energy provision here in the UK. Obviously, in some countries in Europe, it has been a key part, like France, for example. Germany has been decommissioning, bringing its nuclear power stations out of use, but interestingly is now looking at whether it should maintain some of them for the future. So I think there is now more of a question across Europe, parts of continental Europe, about the use of nuclear for the future. Here in the UK, I've always thought, and the government feels it's part of the provision for our energy for the future. Unfortunately, previous governments took a different view and didn't put the investment in that is necessary. So it will take time for us to increase our capability in nuclear. But alongside nuclear, in the UK, for example, wind power is a key issue, something that we've been developing. We now have a significant percentage, over 40% of our electricity generated by renewables. We want to see no electricity generated from coal by the 1st of October 2024. So we really want putting the pressure on that transition away from fossil fuels and onto types of energy that will provide us with much greater domestic energy security, but at the same time are also helping us, as I say, to meet that target we have in relation to net zero emissions.
Ms. May, we cannot talk to you without talking about Brexit. When Britons voted to leave the European Union back in 2016, One of the arguments was that the UK had to regain control over its borders, to regain control over its future. The other idea was also to have more flexibility on signing economic agreements with other countries and other regional blocs. But that still doesn't seem to be happening. And I think that the UK runs the risk of becoming more isolated from the rest of the world. How do you see, how do you read the Brexit now that we have some years, now that we have some years of Brexit?
Well, it's difficult at this stage to identify absolutely what the impact of Brexit has been so far, because of course for 2 years since we left the European Union, since Brexit took place, we had the pandemic, which had a major impact on our economy as it did on economies around the world. So we're only now starting to get to a situation where it will be possible to look at the actual impact of Brexit on our economy. But it is the case that we are now able to negotiate our own trade deals. Most of the trade deals that have been negotiated so far, and I think it's something like over 70, have been continuations of the deals the agreements that we were part of as a member of the European Union. Many countries which had trade agreements with the European Union, the UK has taken the terms of those trade agreements and rolled those forward into a bilateral agreement between us and each of those countries. We have negotiated some new agreements. So we have a trade agreement with Australia, for example. We're well on the way in relation to a trade agreement with New Zealand. We enhanced our trade agreement with Japan. But these things do take time. We will be looking to enhance our trade agreements with other countries around the world as well as looking to join some of the multilateral trade groupings around the world, and notably the Trans-Pacific, the so-called CPTPP agreement. A number of countries who are members of that agreement already, like Japan and Australia, have indicated that they would be interested in the UK becoming part of that. And I think that would be a very good agreement for us to be able to join. But it will take time. Trade agreements do take time. They're tough negotiations, but that we do have that opportunity open to us. Elsewhere, in terms of Brexit, of course, it has raised issues around the movement of goods and services from the UK into the European Union and vice versa. There are now procedures, customs and other procedures in a number of cases that have to be undertaken that weren't necessary when we were a member of the European Union. But as I say, it isn't at the moment possible to see the impact that this is going to have over time, the longer term impact it's going to have on the UK economy. But I think that the UK has a real opportunity in terms of our economy, particularly in relation to what I was saying in response to the previous question, namely in relation to developing a greener economy, green energy, the green skills that are necessary for the future. We've already seen that to a small extent in some parts of the United Kingdom, which previously were more deprived, had less dynamic economies, such as up in the northeast, where there is now a major hub of the production of wind turbines, for example. This brings new jobs, it brings more skilled jobs, it brings higher paid jobs. So there are real opportunities for us to develop our economy in a way that recognises that key issue of climate change. But also, I would like to see the UK being a leader on some of these issues and getting the advantage, obviously economically worldwide, of being that leader.
Just as a follow-up to this point, right, in the future of the UK economy, when we look at the data from afar, We see the pound at multi-year lows. We see inflation hitting new highs, right, in the UK, and still a big deficit, both budget and current account. So how, in your view, can the UK rebound and bounce back from this scenario? What will drive the economy, in your view, in the next couple of years? Is an economy very much based on services, right? Like financial services, for example. So how do you see the UK bouncing back in the next couple of years?
Well, you're right about obviously some of those issues that you've raised. And today here in the UK, we've seen the Bank of England predicting that inflation will reach 13%, and that they've raised interest rates by 0.5%, by 50 points. So taking the action that they believe is necessary to try to rein in inflation, which obviously is not just being felt in the UK, but is being felt currently in other countries around the world. So there is a difficult set of economic circumstances to be dealt with. I think what is important is that we do look to see ways in which we can ensure that there is the environment which is good for business to develop, for business to grow, generating obviously the revenues to support our public services, but also generating that growth, generating those jobs that can ensure that people are in work and in higher paid, higher skilled work. I think one of the issues that we do need to look at carefully here in the UK, which was not in your list, is actually the labour supply, where we see that although there are more people in payrolled employment now than at the start of the pandemic, actually we see the number of people who are economically inactive has increased. And there are some reasons for that. Some of that is about the impact of COVID, the impact of the pandemic. But that is an issue that will need to be addressed by government. So where do we go from here? How can we develop our economy? We shouldn't lose sight of the huge benefits that we have in services, and particularly in financial services. And this is something that the government has been actively looking at, and particularly at what deregulation can take place, deregulation that can take place safely in terms of financial risks in financial services, but that can also free up the city to continue to be that absolutely key and critical financial services centre around the world. And the advantage the UK has is not just our direct financial services. We have a whole ecosystem that supports that in terms of accountancy, legal frameworks, and so forth. So there's a huge advantage there that I believe we can develop further. But alongside that, as I've been saying, I think we do need to look at other parts of our economy and say, to what extent can we develop some of those, develop those more in the future? I would like to see us doing more in relation to the green economy. I think that's a key area for us. I think there are some other areas like AI, where the UK has some advantages. There are companies here at the forefront of that, and where we can be making those, seeing those investments being made and seeing a real benefit from that. So there are certainly difficult times ahead. As I said earlier, for a lot of people currently, it's very difficult. That energy prices going up, food prices increasing. These are does not make life easy for many people here in the UK. So there isn't a single thing that government can do which means that everything's going to be fine tomorrow or next week or next month. But actually, there are things I believe that we can do which will ensure that our economy will be able to bounce back, albeit over that slightly longer term.
Thank you.
Ms. May, okay. Allow me to change the subject a little bit. During your tenure, you gave special attention to health, even announcing a new National Health Service long-term plan. But no longer after that, the world faced COVID-19 pandemic. As December 2021, UK had the second highest COVID death toll within the broader European countries. Do you think that the UK, managed well the COVID-19 pandemic? And do you think that how can we deal with another pandemic diseases, the threats of new pandemic diseases?
Well, first of all, if I may, on the figures, if you look at the absolute figures we announced for deaths from COVID, you're right, they appear to be higher than other countries. But if they're measured in excess deaths, i.e. the number of deaths over and above what would normally be expected over that period of time, actually the picture changes significantly. And it's partly because I think of the way in which the UK chose to count COVID deaths. We counted a COVID death as anybody who died within 28 days of a positive COVID diagnosis. So somebody could die from something completely different, but if they happened to have COVID as well, they were counted as a COVID death. So somebody, for example, could die from their cancer, but if they had COVID, they were counted as a COVID death. So I think it's better to look at the issue of excess deaths. But there are areas, I think, there is going to be an inquiry here in the UK. This has already been opened, a public inquiry led by a leading judge, which will look at how government responded to the pandemic and how it was handled. I think there are some things that the UK got absolutely right, and critical among those was the vaccine. The UK, we saw significant effort here in the UK. Obviously, the AstraZeneca vaccine was developed in cooperation with Oxford University. We saw people changing the whole way in which they approached the development of these vaccines in terms of, I think Oxford University had people working 24 hours a day on this issue, for example, managed to produce that very early vaccine. Obviously, there have been other vaccines as well. But critically, the UK was at the forefront on that. And we were also took a very sensible decision in terms of vaccines for our population, because the UK bought a number of different vaccines. We didn't just say, we're part of this development of this one, so we're going to put all our chips, if you like, in gambling terms on this one. We bought a whole range of vaccines, which meant we were in a much better position than some others to be able to ensure that the country was vaccinated. So I think those are elements. That element, for example, was something the UK got very, very right. Also, we provided significant support to our economy. The furlough scheme for companies that enabled them to maintain employing people, although they weren't able to be in the workplace, was a very good scheme. The support for small businesses and others was very important. So I think we did do those things very well. If we look more widely, as your question suggests, at the global situation for a future pandemic, one of the things that I was very surprised at in the COVID pandemic was that many countries, if you like, retreated into themselves and dealt with the pandemic in their own way. So we saw differences of approach. I would have liked to have seen a much greater coming together across the world of countries asking the question, who's getting it right? What is working? How can we learn from others? What is the best way in which we can all deal with this? And were we to have a future pandemic, I would hope that we would see that greater willingness to cooperate, to work together, and to find solutions across the whole world, rather than that sense sometimes of countries deciding to deal with this in their own way.
I'd like to go back to the environmental agenda and policies. One sensitive topic is always that developed countries and underdeveloped countries should or should not have different policies, right? Because you might need to give an opportunity for underdeveloped countries to right, use some of their natural resources that were already depleted, right, in developed countries. Do you agree with that statement, or do you think policies should be similar, right, across the board in the whole world for us to achieve the global greenhouse emissions targets? And also, as a follow-up, why do you think it's so hard to spread the message that we can have good economic growth, but also deal with climate change at the same time?
Well, thank you. I mean, first of all, I think we're only going to achieve what we need to achieve in relation to climate change if we all work together, if we all focus on the same targets and the same goals. So that's important. I can completely understand that countries which are less developed, looking at developed countries and saying, well, you've used all these fossil fuels, you've had all those advantages, you've created the problem. In a sense, that's probably what they could say. So why should those less developed countries be held back? I don't want to see any country being held back as a result of the battle against climate change. This is something we're all in together. And that's why one of the things that was discussed at COP26 that was very important was this coming together of developed countries to provide greater finance for less developed countries in relation to being able to deal with climate change. But we do all have our role to play. And in some senses, for some of those countries, less developed countries, actually being able, if you like, they don't have to go through the same process of economic evolution that the developed countries went through. They can actually, if you like, leap over part of that process and go more quickly to a green economy. And I think finding the ways in which we help those countries to do that will be incredibly important. But we also need to remember that this isn't just about greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, that is absolutely critical, and the target to reach net zero is critical. But we also need to address the issue of environmental degradation and the degradation of nature. And these are not separate issues. Environmental degradation increases the problem of climate change. And climate change has its impact on the environment. So there is a circle here. There are links between these two. And doing what we need to do to restore our environment, to maintain our environment, to ensure that we're taking that action is an integral part of dealing with climate change. That's why I was very pleased at COP26 last November in Glasgow. I co-chaired one of the plenary sessions on the Nature Day, talking about exactly these issues. And of course, we saw that very important commitment coming out of COP26 in relation to halting and changing the degradation of forests, of rainforests, to which Brazil was a signatory. Now we have to make sure that the countries that signed up to that commitment actually put that into practice. That goes for all of the COP26 commitments. We all signed up to various things. We all now need to make sure that we're doing what we said we would do. Oh, and you asked about the second question. This is something I feel very strongly about. You might have gathered from my answers that I think there are real economic opportunities in dealing with climate change. The difficulty is that I think often business and people and governments get into a mindset of thinking that the only way to see economic growth is the way they've seen it in the past, the way it's been provided in the past. What we need is that sense of innovation, of really moving forward, of moving to a different type of economy in the future. And this can be of real economic advantage to countries and to companies. And I work, as it happens, I chair a not-for-profit organisation in the UK, which brings companies together with academics and non-government organisations to look at ways in which different sectors of our economy can achieve net zero but do it in a business-friendly, economically positive way, i.e. a sustainable way that encourages economic growth. Climate change and economic growth are not opposites. You can achieve economic growth with climate change, but we have to change people's mindset. I have to say, this is not about how we did things in the past, it's about how we're going to do things differently in the future.
Ms. May, you mentioned the rainforest, and I would like to talk a little bit about Brazil. European organizations have been supporting the Amazon in the last few years, but some of them are also have been expressing some concerns. In 2 months' time, we will have presidential elections in Brazil. We will elect a new president. What is your advice to our new president regarding the Amazon?
Well, first of all, we normally have a rule here in the UK that active politicians, and I'm obviously still a member of Parliament, don't sort of try to give the sort of advice to other countries as to what they should be doing in that sense, particularly at a time of potential time of elections. But what I would say is this. I think that the world is concerned about the Amazon. This is a hugely important natural resource. It is a hugely important part of the global environment. And we want to see that being able to be preserved. Brazil took an important step at COP26 when it signed up to, as I just referred to, when it signed up to that commitment in relation to halting the degradation, forest degradation. What is important is that whoever is in government in Brazil after the election follows through on that commitment and actually puts into place what is necessary to enable that commitment to be met. And the world will be watching. The world was very pleased to see Brazil sign up at COP26 and will want to see a future government taking that forward.
Very good. Mrs. May, we're coming to the end of our panel, and we have just one last question regarding leadership, right? If you look at the definition of a leader, that's a person that can guide other people, right, and use their aspirations to achieve a common goal, right? But what we've seen in recent years is that a lot of leaders have emerged actually using people's fears or frustrations, and we've seen a lot of polarization in the world, right? Do you think we have a sort of leadership crisis, or how can we deal with this huge polarized world? And we see this across the board in every country.
Well, I think you have touched on what is a major area of concern in relation to the development of political life across the world. Because you're absolutely right, we have seen that what we call populism, that attempt to appeal to people in a very populist way, suggesting there are easy answers to everything. Leaders are people who are willing to stand up and make clear to everybody, be honest with everybody about the issues that are faced, be honest with people about what it is going to take to deal with those issues. Leaders, true leaders, do not give easy answers. And I think there is one of the problems we have in the world today is that we live, I would say, in an instant world. People expect everything to be instant. You can instantly access information through a device that you have in your pocket. You expect everything to happen quickly and be responded to. News media is 24-hour media, constantly updating what is happening from around the world. We live in that instant world, but actually there are many issues that require time, careful consideration, and often not just difficult decisions, but tough times for people. Dealing with some of the economic issues that were referred to earlier will be difficult, will not be easy, and there are no single solutions that will immediately deliver the answers. So I think there needs to be, we need to see, encourage leaders coming through who will have those honest conversations with the public. Often I think the public can actually see when it is necessary to have that sort of leadership and see when it's necessary for those tough decisions to be taken. What is important is that politicians recognise that, recognise the importance not just of reaching for easy answers. Being a leader is not about grabbing a headline, it's about doing the right thing.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure and an honor to host you here in our panel. Hopefully next year we can have you here with us at Expert 2023. Thank you so much, Mrs. May. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Salva de
you.
palmas.
Thank you very much. Thank you.